Our last talk this morning will be about AI and robotics and what it could mean for education in our professions. And we're very, very fortunate to have as our presenter Diana Oblinger, who's the President Emeritus for EDUCAUSE and previously with the University of North Carolina System, IBM, and Microsoft. She will share her views on how AI and robotics are shaping how we share knowledge, experience, and expertise, and its implications for our professions and higher education. Please welcome Diana Oblinger.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you and think a little bit about what might happen with AI and robotics. And of course, it's kind of like a Rip Van Winkle moment, isn't it? Because we didn't say anything, and all of a sudden in the last year, everybody's talking all the time about AI and robotics. Yet, for some time, we've been surrounded with kind of this digital smartness. You know, Alexa talks to you, Google knows the answers to all of your questions, Amazon knows what you want to buy, and Facebook doesn't just know your friends, they now are going to be able to help you find the perfect partner. And one of the problems is that we wonder sometimes how machines can be smart. And I think the problem is we want everything to look like us, and the truth is that there are lots of ways to be smart that aren't necessarily smart like us. And artificial intelligence is the perfect example of that kind of digital smartness. And of course, artificial intelligence is in its second generation. AI 1.0 was kind of our first foray into it. We tried to make machines and program them to look like the human brain, and it didn't work out quite so well. But we're now in AI 2.0, and really what we've done is used what machines are really good at, and that's massive brute force power, lots of data, quick speeds, being able to churn out answers, look at probabilities, and come up with answers. And of course, artificial intelligence is extremely powerful. One of the icons of AI is IBM's Watson computer. And you've certainly seen the ads in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, about how it can help oncologists with diagnosis of cancer, different kinds of treatments be used in finances, manufacturing, a whole number of different fields. And it's big. It's not just Watson. It's AI all across the board. Late last year, PwC came out with a study looking at the potential impact of artificial intelligence, and it's going to be absolutely huge by 2030. Their estimates are that there will be almost $16 trillion added to the global economy as a result of artificial intelligence, some of it due to reduced costs, some of it's due to consumption benefits where you can buy more because goods and services are cheaper. But that's like 14% of the global GDP. It's big. But many times when people hear those figures, they get worried. They're worried that they're going to be replaced. And Gary Kasparov had something really interesting to say in an editorial a couple of weeks ago. You may remember he was the world chess champion a number of years ago, and he was beat by one of the predecessor machines of Watson. I think it was the Deep Blue machine. And what he said is, people aren't going to be replaced. They're going to be promoted. And if you are going to be promoted, you have to think about the world a little bit differently. And when we think about what's going to happen due to AI, at least in higher education, a lot of the conversation is how we might be replaced by chatbots in the classroom. And I would suggest to you that we may be missing the bigger picture, because it's less about how the delivery of education is going to change than perhaps the substance. And I would suggest to you that one of the big reasons for that is that professional work is being reconfigured thanks to these kinds of smart machines. I'll give you a case in point, something that deals with knowledge processing. And those of you certainly in higher education are familiar with the issues around research, about information overload, and literally as a researcher, how do you find that needle in a haystack, particularly since there's so much literature out there? Well, Watson came in handy here with a group of researchers from Rice University. They wanted to see how they could shift from data processing, which is our old metaphor, to knowledge processing, created something called the Knowledge Information Toolkit using Watson, and it consumes a lot of information. One of the test cases of having lots of information processed by the machine and then given back to researchers was around a protein called p53. And p53 happens to actually be a very important protein because it has to do with tumor suppression. Well, there are something like 70,000 pieces of literature on that little protein, p53. And researchers can consume, really understand, like 1 to 5 pieces of literature a day. So if you were trying to do the research on p53, as a researcher, it might have taken you 38 years to consume that information, and of course you'd be out of date by the time it came up. NIT allowed them to look at the literature, look for patterns, make predictions, and what they found were that there were 7 kinases, that is how you activate p53, that were identified by this particular tool. Turns out ultimately there were 9, but it literally helped the scientists find those needles in a haystack much more quickly than they ever would have been able to in any other way, and focus their resources on the high value options rather than just trying to churn everything. This is what's called augmented hypothesis generation. It's being used in business and industry. There happens to be a company out there by the name of Atomwise that takes drugs that have failed, looks at the properties, and sees where they might be of value in the future. 2 of their early successes were around drugs to help combat Ebola. So it does make a difference, both in the institutions that we serve as well as in the marketplace. So what I would suggest is that our occupations are actually going to evolve as we work alongside these increasingly capable machines. Think about medicine. Ever heard of a precision surgical tool called Da Vinci? It's changing the occupation. It doesn't take away the job of a surgeon, but Da Vinci can do things that a surgeon can't. And together, they can do things that wouldn't have been possible. And of course, Da Vinci is an example of a robot. It's not just artificial intelligence, it's also robotics. And when we think about those robots, a lot of the sensationalism in the last several months has been around how many jobs are going to go away. Well, the truth of technology is that over time, technologies don't cause jobs to go away, they cause them to change. And in many cases, there are actually more jobs than there were previously. But the jobs are different. There was a study that came out from McKinsey a few months ago that talks about jobs changed, jobs gained, and jobs lost. And their projection across the world's economies are that in the United States, about 1/3 of the jobs will be changed because of these different technologies. About 10% of jobs will be in fields that we don't even know about today. The impact of robotics automation is going to be different depending on where you are. In Japan, the estimates are closer to 50% because of the mix of the industries. In Germany, it's about 40%. But the point is, things are going to change. And if they change, education is going to be one of the solutions to addressing that. In Bosch factories, for example, where automation, or augmentation, as some people prefer to say, has come in, they've taken machinists, welders, carpenters, and taught them how to code so that they can use the robots. They upskilled people to take on new positions and add greater value. So jobs will be changed, but it's going to put a lot of pressure, because this is millions and millions of people, on our educational institutions, as well as on business and on government, for how it's going to be done. And I believe that because of that, the changes in our professions, all those things that are happening due to AI, robotics, and other technologies are going to challenge the talent building capacity of our current organizations. But there maybe are ways that we can address that. And you heard about one yesterday and heard about it again from the stage this morning. So if you weren't here in the session to hear about it, let me remind you of what IBM has been doing with its badges and a partnership with Northeastern University, where IBM actually has well over 800,000 badges that they have awarded to people in a variety of different areas. Those badges certify those people know things, that they can do things. Northeastern, actually in a chance conversation apparently, said, well, gee, that's a lot of good stuff. Wonder what we can do with it. And they began mapping those badges to the curriculum, sort of like you would the transfer of courses. And they came up with a lot of equivalencies, if you will. There are currently 3 different degree programs that are offered, professional master's degrees in areas like data analytics, where those badges are used as the beginning point for the degree, where you don't have to take the courses. So it's building professionals from where they are to yet another level of professionalism. And they're not done yet. They've got another 51 different areas that they're looking at, 17 certificate programs. It's not just Northeastern, it's General Electric working with Northeastern, it's IBM looking at other partners. But the point is, rather than us thinking that the way we reskill and upskill people for this new world is going to be a degree, maybe a new degree in artificial intelligence, maybe it's a combination of credentials and education that we haven't thought about before. I would also tell you that not all learning has to come in really big chunks. It can be done in much smaller pieces. I'll give you an example from the corporate world, and that happens to be Google. They have something that they do called whisper courses. And it reminds us that learning doesn't have to be just new learning. Many times you need to be reminded of things you already know, put in context, and help to put it into practice. What they do with these whisper courses is micro-learning. That's about 90 to 120 seconds of content that might be delivered to you. And the context that they use that is that after managers have received employee surveys, you get feedback on how well the company is doing, how much you feel your manager appreciates you, then the managers are given the opportunity to sign up for whisper courses. They're 10 weeks of small lessons. You see an example of one up there on the screen. It happens to provide you with the information about how you acknowledge people, how you show appreciation. Reminds people in a brief statement something they might already know. Gives them a suggestion for action. You see that on that little Post-it note over there. And the rule of thumb is you don't give a suggestion that's bigger than will fit on a Post-it note, because people need to be able to get the idea quickly. The feedback from the courses are that the managers improve on the characteristics that they are looking at. They would recommend it to others. So again, it's a reminder that not all learning has to come in course-sized chunks. We may be able to do it in much smaller segments. Something that is going to also be important to us, as you've heard from the panelists today and yesterday, is that if you are going to change quickly, you kind of need to see what's coming. And that we're now having opportunities to have greater transparency between education and the labor market, and that's going to be a really important thing if we want to change as quickly as this world is changing. We're connecting talent in a number of different ways, and I'll use LinkedIn as an example of how we are connecting talent. LinkedIn is huge. Probably everybody in this room has a profile on LinkedIn. Globally, it's something like 530 million people. And it's not just for people posting jobs or people trying to find jobs, although if you've got that many people, you're more likely to find a match. But there's data generated. That data can be analyzed. You can do analytics on it, find out different competencies that become important. And what you begin to see is that you can predict where jobs might be next. If you are an individual, you can look at what you might want to do next in your career, find out the skills and competencies that are required for that, And oh, by the way, if you want some suggestions about where you can gain those skills and competencies, you might turn to recommendations from lynda.com or other providers, and people are beginning to see a longer trajectory on their career with recommendations and building in shorter segments those credentials that allow them to do better. I would also suggest that we have to stop thinking just about student success, but thinking about career success, because there's not going to be time to stop in between one job, another job, and what you might do next in your career. And sustainable career paths are really going to depend on transferable skills. I know many of you have talked about 21st century skills. That's the kind of thing that we are talking about. People have oftentimes talked about communication skills, critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills as soft skills. And they are anything but soft. They're actually what you need for employment, and a term that I've seen used that I think is very appropriate for the environment we're in today. They are mobility skills. They allow you to go from one field to another to the next one. And the way we build those skills is different than just taking a course. Teamwork, for example, requires that we work in teams. We get feedback about how we operate in a team, both self-review, peer review, coaching that goes over a number of years, not just a one-time issue. So I think all of this suggests that it really is going to be a lot more than chatbots that are found in education a few years from now. But the questions that I think our educational institutions need to ask are a bit different than, are we going to be replaced by a robot or a machine? I'll give you two examples. One, what are the implications for the curriculum? It's not just about how things are delivered, it's fundamentally about the kinds of things that we're going to be teaching. And does the curriculum need to be restructured so that we have shorter kinds of learning experiences? How do we help students in the curriculum understand this new division of labor between machines and human beings? And if algorithms and data are going to be one of the things that's driving our lives, whether we're aware of it or not, should we be thinking about how algorithms and data are represented within our disciplines, within our courses, within the entire curriculum? I think another area to think about is the difference between thinking about degrees and lifelong talent strategies. And questions you might ask among many are, how do you develop that thought of a talent strategy to connect education and information that comes from the labor market more effectively? How do you address the demand for long-term relationships? We don't necessarily have the structures to build that now. And how do we work with business and industry? And what kinds of policies do we enact in government to be sure that we are ready for the future? So I do believe that the world is changing. I think that's what this conference is all about. But we do have opportunities for continuous learning. And I think since we do have those opportunities for continuous learning, we have the opportunity to reimagine what education might be. Thank you.